that is, in fact, been worked on for many years, for 5+ years, Madam Speaker. And what we need to do is to take it to the next step. So we've heard from all opposition critics. We've heard from the minister in the explanation. There's the opportunity, hopefully sooner as opposed to later, where we'll actually see the debate conclude, Madam Speaker, and allow the legislation to ultimately pass into committee stage.
So the honourable member will have 11 minutes the next time this matter is before the House, because now it's time for statements by members. The honourable member for Whitby.
Madam Speaker, while we've been fighting to give Canadians more choices in the grocery aisles and fair prices at the checkout counter, Conservatives have tried to block all of our attempts to help Canadians. Between Jenny Byrne's current affiliations with Loblaws and the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party's past lobbying for Walmart, it's no wonder the Conservatives are ragging the puck on our competition legislation, while they went so soft on Galen Weston at committee, or why they refused to fight for Canadian families. Their leader has been getting his marching orders from corporate CEOs. The Leader of the Opposition will cut your child care, cut your dental care, but not your grocery bill. Conservatives aren't in it for you. They're in it for themselves and their corporate buddies.
Hear, hear. L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to pay tribute to Marina Larouche, who died at the age of 88 in January. She was a mother of 9. She was able to find a balance between work and family at a time when we never even thought about such concepts. She later became a municipal councillor for 28 years. The Access Blueberries campaign led to the creation of a 4-way road in the Laurentide Natural Park. This led to the existence of a safer and easier road that is helping everyone. In 2002, she received the Elizabeth II Prize. In 2015, the Chicoutimi Arena was named after her. Madame Larouche was a model as a woman, mayor, and politician. The honourable member for Glengarry Prescott Russell. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are asking for concrete action to make their grocery bills affordable. We are proposing clear solutions, but Conservative members are going skiing and ragging the puck, which is not surprising because Jenny Byrne is associated with Loblaws, and the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party used to lobby for Walmart. So it's very clear that the Conservative leader is getting his marching orders from the CEOs of big business. We know that the Conservatives are not sincere about adopting the Grocery Code of Conduct, and that's why they don't want to strengthen competition legislation. The leader of the Conservative Party will cut the services Canadians need, but not cut their grocery bills. The Conservatives are not there for you. They are there for themselves and for their buddies. When Conservative members rise on the other side of the House to yell about affordability, it reminds me of a chihuahua. The barking is loud, but there's no bite. The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, Dany Laferrière is one of the greats. And in fact, he was honoured with the top prize of the French Francophones Ambassadors Group on the 1st of February in Paris, after publishing a book titled A Brief Treaty on Racism, a subject which is very delicate, but Laferrière addressed it with great nuance and simplicity, with a shared question without an imposed answer. Whether with novels or nonfiction, he brought into our lives the charm and playfulness of a difference that should not have to pay a price in suffering. When I saw him in Paris in October, he was staying in an artist residence and was charming everyone around him. For all these reasons, I'm honored to mention the recognition that he's received, which pays tribute to Quebec and Haiti.
Un des plus grands.
One of the greatest.
Member from Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you. This past weekend, I had the pleasure of attending the Aurora Black Community Gala to celebrate Black History Month. This wonderful sold-out evening featured the talents and achievements of the local Black community. Our Prime Minister sent a personal message to Fiona Durant, the indomitable president of ABC, which I had the pleasure of presenting to her. The Honourable Jean Augustine, the force behind Black History Month, was present as a guest of honour, and our Minister of Diversity and Inclusion joined us to underscore the importance of this month. As allies, we join together in these meaningful celebrations, but we must also continue the important work alongside organizations such as ABC to support Black communities, combat systemic racism, and ensure that every Canadian has equal opportunity to benefit from all Canada has to offer. Our government has made significant investments to support Black communities and will continue to do so. ABC's theme this year is Forward Together, Forward for All, and that is exactly what we must do. Move Canada forward, together, for all.
Here. The honourable member from Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Mr. Speaker, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and Yukon know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. From his NDP Liberal government's own 2023 Northern Housing Report, after 8 years, housing starts in Yukon are down 19.3%. Housing starts are down 21.2% in Northwest Territories. Less than 20% of families can afford to purchase a home in Nunavut. And if you're lucky enough to have a house in Nunavut, your mortgage payment went from $2,000 a month to $3,200 a month in just 1 year. But Northerners have a choice next election. The costly coalition NDP Liberal government and their quadrupling of the carbon tax, their Northern housing crisis, their wasteful spending, their 30-year high murder rates, or our common sense plan to axe the tax, build homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. And it's time, Mr. Speaker, to bring it home.
The honourable member from Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, as Canadians and Liberals are very much concerned about the price of groceries, a very serious issue. That's one of the reasons why we brought in the Competition Act.
That's right.
Let me talk to you about a lady by the name of Jenny Byrne. Jenny Byrne was the leadership campaign manager for the leader of the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. Did you know that she still is the senior advisor to the leader of the Conservative Party? Mr. Speaker, she is also an active advisor to Loblaws. She's the one that's telling Loblaws, who's making billions of dollars in terms of what it is that they should be doing. Mr. Speaker, not to be outdone, the deputy leader of the Conservative Party, you can't make this up. She's the former advocate for Walmart, Mr. Speaker. Talk about conflict. How dare the Conservatives try to say that they're on the side of Canadians when it comes to grocery prices, Mr. Speaker? That's just not true.
Carrier. L'honorable député de Vimy.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 251, proudly celebrated on January 27th. Congratulations, you make us proud, and we are honored to count on the strength and service the Legion offers to our constituents. Depuis 60 ans, les...
For 60 years, members of Legion 251 in the riding of Vimy have embodied the values of loyalty, sacrifice, and community spirit. Every year in Laval, we are very proud to attend the annual Remembrance Day Parade. Thanks to local initiatives, support for veterans, inspiration to our Cadet Corps, and their role as guardians of our common heritage. They constantly weave the fabric of our community. Thank you for encouraging us to remember our fallen heroes and to share the principles that bring us together as Canadians.
The honourable member from Dauphin Swan River, Nipawin.
After 8 years, Canadians know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Rural Canadians in particular no longer have a government who works for them. No government has failed to represent rural Canadians more than his Liberal NDP coalition. This Prime Minister has neglected, divided, and punished rural Canadians for simply living their rural way of life. The good news is that Canadians will have a clear choice in the next election. A choice between a costly Liberal NDP coalition that will raise your taxes, double your housing costs, and allow crime and chaos in your community, or a choice to elect Conservatives who will restore hope for all Canadians. The common sense Conservative plan is straightforward. axe the carbon tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Only Conservatives will help rural Canada and all Canadians.
The honourable member from St. Catharines.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honour an unsung hero of Canadian basketball. Ben Newman, a St. Catharines businessman, staged the first ever NBA game and brought Toronto its first professional basketball team. At only 26, he went to New York to represent Canada, what was then called the Basketball Association of America. In 1946, Newman was essential in organizing the NBA's inaugural game, where the New York Knickerbockers narrowly beat the Toronto Huskies 68-66. At the time, the Globe and Mail said Newman was considered one of the Dominion's great authorities on the sport. While the Huskies only played for one season, 2 of their players are now honored in the Canadian Basketball Hall of Fame. And in this House, we know Toronto continues to excel in the NBA. Ben Newman left a legacy of generosity and joy for his family and for St. Catharines and for all Canadian basketball fans. He's remembered by his wife Sheila, his daughter Francine, and his grandson Jordan, who continue to share his story. Newman will also be on this year's ballot as a builder of the game at the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in Massachusetts. I hope his impact will be remembered here and throughout Canada.
The honourable member from York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal NDP government has created a made-in-Canada housing crisis. Our country is now the least affordable housing market in the entire world, and the Prime Minister's costly policies have only made matters worse. Retirees are now living in laundry rooms. Millennials are living in their parents' basements. Students are living under bridges, and Canadians of all ages are having to choose between paying their rent or mortgage, putting food on the table, and heating their homes. Investing in a home of your own is about shelter, but it's also about independence, stability, and opportunities. These dreams used to be available and achievable for any Canadian, but not anymore. The Liberals have no real solutions to fix their made-in-Canada housing crisis. After 8 years, the chickens have come home to roost, or at least they would if they had a home. Conservatives will build the homes, fix the budget, axe the tax, and stop the crime. Now let's go!
The honourable member from Niagara Falls.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Liberal government has allowed catch-and-release criminals to cause chaos in our streets, resulting in car theft numbers unlike anything we've ever seen in the past. According to the Liberal government's own news release, auto thefts in Toronto are up 300% since 2015. And what happened in 2015? This Liberal government happened in 2015. This auto theft crisis has happened under their watch, and parts are full of stolen cars waiting to be shipped overseas, while Canadians are left paying the price through increased insurance premiums. This Liberal MDP coalition and Prime Minister are not worth the cost. Change is needed, and only Conservatives will increase the mandatory minimum penalty for a third offence of motor vehicle theft, and we will repeal the catch-and-release rules in this government's Bill C-75 to ensure that repeat offenders get jail, not bail. A Conservative government will hit the brakes on car theft, protect the property of Canadians, and bring home safe streets. It's just common sense.
The honourable member from Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, while Loblaw's profits are at an all-time high, so are Canadian grocery bills. And who's working to keep it that way? The Leader of the Opposition's campaign manager and top political advisor. Last week we learned that Jenny Byrne, a senior Conservative advisor, is currently listed as an active lobbyist for Loblaw's, all while she participates in Conservative caucus meetings and has daily calls with the Leader of the Opposition to set strategy. While Jenny Byrne has been profiting off the anti-competitive practices of Loblaw's, the Leader of the Opposition has been profiting off her counsel on exploiting Canadians' anxieties over grocery prices. Now it all makes sense why Conservative MPs have been putting up roadblocks on legislation to combat predatory pricing and anti-competition practices. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will keep working to combat high grocery prices despite the interests of Conservative insiders.
The honourable member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honour the work of volunteer firefighters and search and rescue teams across Northwest BC. These folks give a tremendous amount of their personal time both training and responding to calls, and they do it for one reason: to protect their neighbors. I think it's one of the truest expressions of community that there is. I want to give a special tribute today to the volunteers of Terra Search and Rescue who responded to the tragic helicopter crash in our region on January 22nd, which claimed 4 lives. Their skilled response in difficult winter conditions was invaluable. Now, there's a small way we can recognize volunteer contributions like this, and that is by increasing the income tax deduction for fire and search and rescue volunteers from $3,000 to $10,000. And I'm proud to stand with my colleague, the member for Courtenay Alberni, and our entire caucus in supporting this one important change.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, this week, the Canadian U18 Curling Championships will begin, and the riding of Jonquière is represented in Ottawa. Thanks to the Kenogami Fortin La France team, they received Curling Quebec's title of Team of the Year for the 2021-22 season. And this year will be especially special for the member for Lac-Saint-Jean and for me, because both teams representing Quebec and Ottawa in this competition come from our beautiful part of the country, which is also full of talent. I am very proud to see these young athletes representing Quebec here in Ottawa and show off the athletic talent in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region. I'd like to conclude by wishing them all success. Julianne, Megan, Amy, Megan, and their coach Brandon, congratulations.
The Honourable Member from King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-234 is asking for a carbon tax carve-out for farmers. The PBO has stated that this bill will save Canadian farmers $1 billion by 2030. That's right. By fighting to keep the carbon tax on farmers, Liberals are voting to keep grocery prices high. Everyone knows that when you tax a farmer who grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, the buyer who buys the food. The Liberal government is sending 2 million people per month to food banks. The number of people eating at food banks in Toronto today would fill the Rogers Centre 7 times. Seniors are the fastest growing users of food banks. The Liberal Environment Minister admitted in committee that he called 6 senators and pressured them to cut the bill. Liberals want to continue with their plan to quadruple the carbon tax on farmers from 14 to 61 cents a litre. Our Conservative amendment will reject the Senate changes and restore this bill to its original plan. Conservatives will axe the tax, build the home, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
The Honourable Member from Pickering-Uxbridge.
Mr. Speaker, last week we learned the Conservatives' top advisor, Jenny Byrne, is also a lobbyist for Loblaws. Maybe this explains why Conservative MPs have been blocking legislation to deal with predatory pricing. 6 leaders and counting, but it's the same old Conservative Party who promised to stand up for Canadians, but in reality they are making deals behind closed doors to help their wealthy, connected friends. Mr. Speaker, we know these Conservatives love a slogan, so here's one for Canadians to remember. The Leader of the Opposition will raise grocery prices in your home, in my home. They're going to bring higher prices home, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. It's expensive to vote for the Bloc, Mr. Speaker. The Bloc voted for Liberal Bill C-75 to release car thieves the same day they're arrested. The Bloc also supported C-5, which allows criminals to serve their sentences at home. And these laws have increased car theft by 200% in Montreal and 300% in Toronto. Will the government reverse these policy decisions and replace them with some common sense policy to get rid of this awful problem? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the opposition leader is pretending to care about car theft. Last week, he pretended to care about grocery prices. But, Mr. Speaker, we have found out that his campaign leader is a main lobbyist for Loblaws. This is what's going on behind closed doors within the Conservative Party. What did he promise his campaign leader? That's my question. The Honourable Opposition Leader. Well, to axe the tax. That's what I promised. We are also going to fix car theft problems. I announced a common sense plan today to put an end to sentences being served at home and also to put an end to automatically releasing car thieves on bail. 3 car thefts should lead to 3 years behind bars. Will the government stop the crime that it has caused? We have a common sense plan. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader likes to talk about clarity and common sense, so here's some questions for him. What did his campaign leader advise him regarding grocery prices and costs in Canada, and what did he promise her? Because his political career is all thanks to this person. So what did he promise her? She speaks to his party's caucus behind closed doors. What is she advising all of these Conservatives about the cost of living and about grocery prices in Canada? It's so hypocritical, Mr. Speaker.
What I promised was to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. The Prime Minister, with the support of the NDP, passed catch and release that allows career car thieves to be released the same day they are caught stealing cars, to have house arrest, and to have shorter sentences, many of which they serve in their living room watching Netflix. That has led to a 100% increase in car theft in Montreal and Ottawa, and a 300% increase in Toronto. Will they reverse these disastrous and reckless policies so that we can stop the crime?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, of course this government has a comprehensive plan on auto theft. It's interesting, though, the leader this week is pretending to care about food prices and about competition in the grocery sector. This week he's pretending to care about auto theft, Mr. Speaker, but we find out that his campaign manager, the woman to whom he owes the leadership of this party, is addressing he and his caucus and advising them on food prices. What is her advice, and what does he owe his campaign manager, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah, the advice is to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost and not worth the crime. We now are paying $1 billion more in insurance premiums because he has led to a quadrupling of car thefts in Toronto. I have a common sense plan, which I rolled out today, to end house arrest and catch and release for career criminals and bring in 3 years of jail for 3 stolen cars. Will this government accept the common sense plan?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
I'm very happy that the Leader of the Opposition, after reading a government press release, has finally tuned into this issue. But a couple of clarifications. Mandatory minimums for auto theft for repeat offences already exist in the criminal code. So you're not changing something that already exists. Secondly, as an aggravating factor for an auto theft that occurs with organized crime, that's already on the books too. 718.2 of the criminal code, Mr. Leader of the Opposition. Why don't we focus on things we can actually do, like getting tough with organized crime and anti-money laundering?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
They are opposed to mandatory minimums for car auto theft, and furthermore, the minister claimed that he brought in bail reform that would stop auto theft, only that their bail reform doesn't apply to auto theft. So he's got to read his own law before trumpeting it in the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, they've given us a 300% increase in auto theft in Toronto, a 300% increase in auto claims this year alone. That is their record. We have a common sense plan to stop the crime. Why won't they implement it today?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Canada.
Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition purports to be tough on crime. You know who I listen to about crime measures? Police officers. You know what they tell me, Mr. Speaker? They tell me that this isn't an individual crime. This is backed by people who are organized criminals. How do we deal with that? We get tough on money laundering. 59. That has measures that deal with money laundering that you're voting against.
Before we continue with question period, for the second time, I'd like to remind members that all comments go through the chair. I remind the Honourable Minister that all members come through the chair as opposed to directly to another member of Parliament. L'honorable député de La Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to asylum seekers, the Liberals are mocking Quebecers. The $470 million they've owed Quebecers since 2021 has not been repaid. What's more, this Liberal government is going to give Toronto $143 million to house future asylum seekers and only $100 million for the entire province of Quebec. It's just one injustice after another when it comes to asylum seekers. Ottawa isn't paying Quebec what it already owes Quebec, and for the future, it's not even giving Quebec its fair share. Enough is enough. The Liberals have mocked Quebecers long enough. Where is our $470 million? The Honourable Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bloc Québécois feels that $70 million, $50 million, and $100 million are nothing. Well, this money is very significant and helpful for asylum seekers in Quebec. And as the member knows full well, we have good rapport with the government of Quebec. We will work with them responsibly. And the Quebec Finance Minister will be meeting our Finance Minister today. We will continue to work well together. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. He's the only one who thinks the relationship is going well with the government of Quebec. You know, $143 million is going to Toronto to house future asylum seekers, but only $100 million for Quebec. Meanwhile, all of Quebec's requests are quite literally being ignored. There's been no repayment of the $470 million. There's no plan to share the cost of welcoming newcomers with the provinces. There are no visas for Mexicans, no acceleration of the processing of applicants' files, no work permits within an acceptable time frame. No one is listening or taking action when we call on the Liberals to do their job. They're always lecturing, but never doing any work. When are they going to get to work? The Honourable Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Minister. Well, they are being armchair managers, as they often do. We gave $50 million to Quebec with $100 million additional funding to house asylum seekers. And this year, the Bloc Québécois is cherry-picking its statistics, reaching all sorts of random conclusions. They're being armchair managers. Meanwhile, we will work with the government of Quebec to do the work that needs to be done to welcome asylum seekers. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
And Manulife Insurance teamed up to end the coverage or limit the coverage of 260 medications for Canadians. More profits for them and less coverage for Canadians. Well, they tried to do it. We fought back and they walked back that decision. But the Prime Minister has an opportunity now. They have an opportunity now to end this once and for all by bringing in pharmacare. This is something the Prime Minister has promised and broken that promise. The Liberals have promised and failed for 30 years. So what the Prime Minister has a choice. Will he choose to stop working for big pharma? Yes or no?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister for Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we share the member's objective to reduce drug price for Canadians and to make sure that we have a competitive and fair environment in Canada. We're working together on pharmacare legislation. I look forward to continuing those conversations. And of course, Canada, by engaging in bulk purchasing, has seen a reduction of about $300 million in the cost of drugs for Canadians across this country, with many countries looking to how they can emulate that kind of practice to reduce drug prices in their countries. We're going to continue to do everything we can, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
I'm choosing big pharma and Canadians keep paying the price. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, Liberals are talking about Loblaws and how the other party has ties to Loblaws, but they have ties with Loblaws. In fact, over the past years, they met with Loblaws 60 times. And they have received millions of dollars, or thousands of dollars, rather, from the Sobeys family. They need to bring down prices. When will the Liberals stop governing for the Sobeys and Westons of this world?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely essential that we bring down the cost of living, and we need to improve affordability. That is why we worked with all provinces and territories to buy medication for bulk purchasing to bring down costs. Now, as for lobbying, That's a question for Jenny Burns, I'd say, Mr. Speaker.
From Calgary Forest Lawn.
This Liberal NDP government continues to scam Canadians with their carbon tax. They said it would reduce emissions. It didn't. They said Canadians would get more in these phony rebates, and they don't. And they plan to increase this carbon tax scam in April, making the cost of everything go up. As 2 million Canadians visit a food bank in a single month, a third of which are children. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will the Liberals stop their plans to increase the carbon tax scam on April the 1st, making the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating even more expensive?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I find it incredulous that the opposition is speaking about scams. When you think about the advice that they are giving Canadians to invest in volatile cryptocurrency, to fire the Governor of the Bank of Canada, one of Canada's foremost institutions, and to vote not once, not twice, but 120 times against supports for Canadians, including our armed forces and including Ukraine. That's the height of hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to vote against all measures that makes Canadians' lives even harder and even more expensive every single time. Conservatives are on the side of Canadians who are having to go into food banks more than ever before and making the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating more expensive because of their carbon tax scam. This Liberal NDP government is immune to the pain that they're causing on Canadians because they're always working for the Liberal insiders and consultants. Why don't they scrap the scam and axe the tax to bring down the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating already?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, after the news this weekend about insiders, I find it rich coming from the opposition that they're going to criticize that point. But I will ask them in return, what is it that they would cut? Are they going to cut supports to Ukraine and the Canadian Armed Forces? Yes. Are they going to cut affordable housing, Mr. Speaker? Are they going to cut the Canada Child Benefit and $10 a day childcare? Let's hear it. What are they going to cut?
Order. I'd like to hear the question from the Honourable Member from Foothills.
Well, I'm very proud to say the first thing we'll cut is the Liberal NDP carbon tax to make life more affordable for Canadians. Because Canadians are paying more for food than they ever have before, with 2 million people relying on a food bank every month. The Prime Minister's solution, let's make food even more expensive. On April 1st, they plan to increase the carbon tax by 23%, part of their plan to quadruple the carbon tax. Conservatives have a common sense bill, C-234, which will remove the carbon tax for farmers, making food more affordable for Canadians. Why will the Prime Minister not cancel his plan to increase the carbon tax on April 1st to ensure Canadians can feed their families?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it's rich coming from this opposition talking about food prices when we know that that member's campaign chair, campaign manager, senior advisor, the person that walks into their caucus every week and gives them advice is the chief lobbyist for Loblaws in this country, Canada's leading food retailer. Mr. Speaker, instead of talking about axe the tax, maybe they should axe the hacks.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
The desperation from the Liberals is incredible as they continue to avoid the real question. Canadian farmers should be applauded for their environmental accomplishments instead of being punished by the carbon taxes from this Liberals. Why? To produce a ton of canola in Saskatchewan is 67% lower than the carbon footprint of European wheat. You can transport wheat, Canadian wheat, 3.5 times around the world before it has the same global footprint of wheat grown in Europe. But the Prime Minister wants to punish farmers instead of rewarding them for their environmental stewardship. Why won't the Prime Minister cancel his carbon tax increase on farmers to make sure that we can grow food for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard today Alberta MPs talking about vulnerable, and yet the leader of the Conservative Party claims to talk about freedom, but now he's showing every Canadian exactly the type of leader he is. He is showing Canadians what type of person he is. He is the one standing with the bullies. He is the one who's picking up.
I'm just having a little bit of trouble hearing the Honourable Member. The Honourable Member has 15 seconds left on the clock. I'll ask all members to please order. The Honourable Minister for Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, he is the one who's standing with the bullies. He is the one who is picking on vulnerable people, standing with Danielle Smith instead of defending the most vulnerable youth in our country. Mr. Speaker, he has shown Canadians who he is, and Canadians will not forget.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Today, the costly Bloc Liberal coalition will have the opportunity to vote on a Conservative motion to cancel the April 1st carbon tax increase. 800,000 Quebecers are lining up at food banks every month. Meanwhile, the Bloc and the Liberals think that it's a good time and a good idea to raise taxes. What's worse, Bloc MPs want to radically increase the carbon tax, which has a direct impact on the cost of groceries in Quebec. Who will have the courage to vote against Bloc Liberal ideology this afternoon? Who will let more families keep more money in their pockets, and who will decrease food bank use? The Honourable Environment and Climate Change Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind my honourable colleague that federal carbon pricing does not apply to Quebec because they have had a cap-and-trade system for over 10 years. That is Quebec's government's system. So he can talk to François Legault, Quebec's premier, about this if he wants to. I'll give him his contact information. But let's talk about what we've done. We support sustainable agriculture. They voted against it. They voted against funding to help dairy producers and poultry producers who are under supply management. That's what they voted against, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Well, what their Liberals are trying to do is distract us, divide us, to make us forget their disastrous track record, which has resulted in 2 million people using food banks every month. They think it's funny, but it's not funny, Mr. Speaker, that 2 million Canadians are using food banks every month because they can no longer afford groceries, Mr. Speaker. Who will do the right thing this afternoon? The right thing, that is voting for the Conservative Party's motion to cancel the tax hike scheduled for April 1st. Who will have the courage to do the right thing? The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, people are watching us, and they don't understand why, in 2024, a party that wants to maybe form government still doesn't understand that climate change is real. In fact, last year, there was a 20% decrease in grain production due to drought, and drought in 2023 dropped grain production by 13%, Mr. Speaker. And over the course of the past decade, 200,000 farmers in Canada have experienced higher costs due to climate change. Why do the Conservatives want to let people pollute for free, Mr. Speaker? Before we go to the member for Mirabel for his question, I would encourage all members to wait their turn before asking their question. The honourable member for Mirabel. 41% increase in business bankruptcies last year, and 61% of those bankruptcies were in Quebec. Mr. Speaker, that is the biggest increase on record. And in the middle of all that, the federal government imposed the January 18th deadline for small and medium enterprises to repay the emergency account without penalty. In a Radio-Canada report, Trustee Stéphane Leblanc warned that insolvency cases have been on the rise for the past month. And it's obvious that the Liberals have just added $20,000 worth of debt to at-risk SMEs. Why not be more flexible with these businesses rather than trying to kill them off? The Honourable Minister of Small Businesses. Mr. Speaker, the Canada Emergency Business Account was created to keep businesses afloat throughout the pandemic and to allow them to get back on their feet. Over 80% of businesses have repaid their CEBA loans, and thus they get some loan forgiveness. We are also helping businesses with credit card loans so that they can keep more businesses and more money. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Well, the Liberals brag that 80% of SMEs paid back their emergency account on time, but that's not good news because it means that 20% of SMEs are at risk of bankruptcy. These aren't multinationals we're talking about. These are small shops and restaurants in our neighborhoods. In order to help them, the government needs to do three things. 1, study their cases on a case-by-case basis. 2, guarantee loans from financial institutions. And 3, reinstate the $20,000 subsidy. What is so hard about showing our local businesses a bit of flexibility? The Honourable Regional Development Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question. I would like to remind my colleague that that wasn't the first extension of the deadline, it was the second. We offered 2 extensions to businesses, and businesses were supported by the government, but if they cannot repay it, we will guarantee it for 3 years at an interest rate of 5%, which is $250 a month in repayment payments. Also, in Canada, we are looking to the future. I've just made announcements in Drummondville, in Sherbrooke, and in many regions in Quebec. We will continue to support businesses, and we will help them with what they need. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Last week, I talked to a restaurant owner in Trois-Rivières. When he applied for the emergency account a few years ago, he couldn't have predicted that food inflation would increase by 10% every year. He couldn't have predicted that patronage would decline this much. Ahead of the January 18th deadline, he asked his bank for a loan to repay the federal government. The bank said no, because of the uncertainty in the restaurant businesses. Banks, they don't want the risk that the federal government would have to assume. So when he couldn't pay, the federal government demanded another $20,000. How many restaurants, just like his restaurant, do the Liberals intend to close? The Honourable Tourism and Regional Development Minister. Mr. Speaker, if the government hadn't been there to support these businesses would not have made it through the most significant pandemic this country has ever experienced. Now we need to look toward the future, Mr. Speaker. We need to support businesses deal with the challenges of the future. For example, the energy transition, Mr. Speaker, and also improved productivity to deal with labour shortages. On this side of the House, we will continue to support all businesses.
The Honourable Member from Lloydminster Battleford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is costing Canadians more than they can afford. His punishing carbon tax is already driving up the cost of groceries, heating, and gas. And on April 1st, this NDP Liberal government wants to increase it once again. Conservatives introduced a common-sense motion to cancel the planned carbon tax hike that will cost them even more on gas, groceries, and home heating. Will the Liberals support our common-sense Conservative motion and cancel their April 1st carbon tax hike?
Hear, hear. Well done.
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we hear misleading rhetoric from the other side of the House. Folks in Canada know that 80% of Canadian families get more money back than they pay. It is an affordability measure as well as something that actually addresses the climate crisis in front of us. It is something that helps the poorest of Canadians. And in fact, what he wants to do is take away the rebate. He wants to take away from poor and modest income people money that actually help to pay for groceries, that help to pay for rent, that help to pay for transportation. Shame on you for trying to target those folks and benefit only the wealthy in Canada.
I know that there are many things I must regret. I'm hoping that this is not one of them. So I'd invite ministers to please make sure that the answers are directed through the chair. The Honourable Member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, that minister can manipulate the facts all day long, but that's not going to change the painful reality that Canadians across this country are experiencing. Let's not forget that the PBO has said that Canadians will still be paying hundreds of dollars in carbon tax even after the rebate. Canadians who are already struggling to afford gas, groceries, and home heating cannot afford this NDP Liberal government's carbon tax increase. Will the Liberals show some compassion and cancel their April 1st carbon tax increase?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, if Conservatives are truly concerned about the price of groceries, why don't they just ask their top advisor to pick up the phone and talk to Loblaws? Or perhaps the next time she goes to pick up her paycheck, she could just ask Loblaws to join in our work to bring down lower grocery prices, to bring in more competition, and to get rid of predatory practices. Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives are truly concerned for Canadians, I know just the person they can have to give their buddies at Loblaws a call.
The The honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, Canadians have had enough of this government's inflationary policies and excessive taxes. The Bloc Québécois 100% fully supports the Liberals when it comes to radically increasing the carbon tax. 2 million Canadians are going to food banks every month. Also, farms are going out of business because the carbon tax is crushing them. The government is asleep at the wheel. They need to wake up, do the right thing, and suspend the increase scheduled for April 1st. The Honourable Government House Leader. What hypocrisy! What hypocrisy coming from that side of the House today, Mr. Speaker. We have found out that the campaign manager, maybe that hasn't been translated into French yet for the member across the way, but in fact, the opposition's leader's spiritual leader is the chief lobbyist for the biggest grocery company, and they're trying to give us advice?
The Honourable Order. The Honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills is an experienced member and a very respected member, and knows full well that he should wait his term before he is able to address the House. The Honourable member from Edmonton Griesbach.
Danielle Smith is denying trans kids their basic human rights by denying their access to life-saving health care. It's not the role of politicians to tell doctors how to treat patients. Meanwhile, this leader of the Conservative Party remains shamefully silent on attacks on trans rights. The hate and prejudice of some should never override the fundamental rights of others. Will this government commit to using the powers of the Canada Health Act to intervene in any denial of life-saving care for trans youth?
The Honourable Minister.
Warm, fuzzy video hiding daggers at my community in Alberta came out last week on social media. I have spent hours on the phone consoling people who are crying on the phone asking how we can stand up for the rights of 2 LGBTQ people in Alberta. Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to work on this, and I have one message for Albertans and people across the country. Legal challenges notwithstanding, the one way we can stop this is to kill the bill before it gets to the legislature. So write to your UCP members, get fired up, mobilize, because kids' rights matter.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, parents deserve affordable quality childcare, and childcare workers need livable wages. But the Liberals are letting the $10 a day childcare program fail by not giving workers fair pay and benefits, leaving parents without childcare spots. And Conservatives, they want for-profit childcare. This means...
I hate to interrupt the Honourable Member. Sometimes, colleagues, sometimes we can clearly hear the question and sometimes we can't. This is one of the opportunities where the chair cannot hear the question. I ask all members please to keep your conversations private so I could hear the Honourable Member. Can the Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre start her question again from the top?
Mr. Speaker, parents deserve affordable quality childcare, and childcare workers need livable wages. But the Liberals are letting the $10 a day childcare program fail by not giving workers fair pay and benefits, leaving parents without childcare spots. And the Conservatives, they want for-profit childcare. This means higher fees for parents and lower wages for workers. Liberals and Conservatives don't care about care workers. When will the Liberals finally enforce livable wages and benefits for childcare workers so they can live in dignity?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Families and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our national childcare program is making life more affordable for thousands of Canadian families, as is the Canada Child Benefit. We continue to work with the provinces and territories to ensure that the 5-year agreements are upheld, that we do see improvements to wages and benefits for the essential caregivers that we all rely on for the childcare that our kids need. On this side of the House, we continue to do the hard work, and we continue to see the Conservatives oppose every step of the way. Shameful.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
For 8 years,
members, this NDP Liberal government, it pays to commit crime in Canada. Stolen cars now cost Canadians over $1 billion a year in insurance rates. Car thefts are up 300% in Toronto. That's thanks to the catch and release legislation that turns violent offenders loose onto the streets, allowing them to commit more crime. When will they reverse their disastrous policies, put the bad guys in jail so that Canadians can keep their cars?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I thank the member for her question. I remind her that she represents a part of the Greater Toronto Area, as do I. What I hear from my constituents and people throughout the 905 is that they're concerned about criminality, and they applaud the fact that we took steps to ensure with bail reform that serious violent repeat offenders are being kept off our streets. The other thing they applaud is when we work hand in hand with the police to keep our communities safe. So when I'm standing with the Chief of the Durham Police and a progressive Conservative Premier and giving them $121 million to help with law enforcement, they're saying that's a step in the right direction, and there's more to come.
And before I go to the member of Thornhill's second question, I'd like to apologize to the member for Don Valley East, whose question I skipped by mistake, but it's illogical to go with the second question of the member from Thornhill. The honourable member.
Speaker, I don't know why we have to explain this to the Attorney General, but bail reform doesn't apply to auto theft. It's thanks to their policies that you can get arrested in the morning and go back to committing crimes in the evening. And if you happen to get sentenced, you can serve the sentence in the comfort of your own home while watching Netflix or even Disney+. That is Canada's justice system after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government. So when will this Liberal government listen to common sense Conservative policies, repeal the catch and release, the stay-at-home sentencing, and finally put offenders in jail where they belong?
That's right.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
I very much appreciate the interventions from the member opposite, but if we're going to talk about the criminal code, let's talk about the mandatory minimum that still exists for repeat auto theft offenders under 331.1 sub A. Let's talk about the fact that when you commit an auto theft crime and you're involved with organized criminality, that's already an aggravating factor on sentencing. Oh yes, that was 718.2 sub A sub 4. Please take note. The important piece is that we are bringing together stakeholders, auto industry, every actor that's involved in this system to ensure we tackle this at every dimension. That conversation is happening this week. It's too bad they won't be there for it.
The honourable member from Don Valley East.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to wish every member in this House a happy Black History Month. Speaker, February is a time where we can remind ourselves of the contribution of Black Canadians in this country, the contributions that go back hundreds of years to helping build a beautiful Canada. It's also a time for us to remind ourselves that there's still barriers that are in place that we have to remove. Can the Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities please tell us more about Black History Month this month?
Bravo.
The Honourable Minister for Diversity and Inclusion.
Mr. Speaker, this year's theme for Black History Month is Black Excellence, a heritage to celebrate, a future to build. It's about telling the stories of thousands of incredible Black trailblazers who have made Canada the country it is today. It's about recognizing the resilience of Black Canadians in the face of injustice. It's about celebrating the fact, Mr. Speaker, that Black history is Canadian history, and our government will continue to be deliberate about investing directly into Black communities so that we can continue to build a more inclusive and equitable future for all Canadians. Happy Black History Month, everyone.
Go ahead.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years under this Prime Minister, auto theft has increased significantly in Canada and 59% in Quebec alone. The ports, the RCMP, CBSA, and the Criminal Code all fall under federal jurisdiction. Instead of taking action, the Liberal government is committing to hold a discussion about this. It's a waste of time. We already know that there are weak Liberal policies on crime, and they're responsible for this increase. Does the Prime Minister recognize that he alone is responsible for the increase in auto theft? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. The increase in auto theft affects us all and directly concerns us. What we have is that organized crime is connected with this kind of theft. What we have on the table here in the House of Commons is a bill that affects money laundering. C-59 that the Conservatives are voting against. If they are really for fighting car theft, I would invite them to change their decision on this vote. The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, what we know at present is this Prime Minister has made Canada number one in terms of exports of stolen cars around the world. This morning, our leader proposed solutions to fix the harm caused by Liberal legislation. Among other things, we will discourage car theft by stopping house arrest and increasing prison sentences for these kinds of criminals. That's common sense, Mr. Speaker. Will the government commit to supporting our efforts to fight auto theft? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Mr. Speaker, as I have mentioned several times, the fact that there is a mandatory minimum penalty for car theft, it already exists in the criminal code. The fact that it is tied to organized crime, this can lead to a higher sentence. It's already set out in the criminal code. What's not in the criminal code is the fact that we must fight more to fight organized crime. But there is a bill which is here on the table in the House of Commons, and the Conservatives will vote against it. The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. The Americans are continuing to unfairly attack our softwood lumber industry. Again, last Thursday, the U.S. officially announced a nearly 14% hike in their illegal duties starting next summer. Ottawa must clearly stand up for Quebec forests, but it will take more than just words to get through the crisis. Ottawa must absolutely offer a loan and loan guarantee program to match the unjust amounts being taken by Washington. Will the government take up a proposal to protect our businesses and our workers? The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
My honourable colleague for that important question. We have consistently stood up and said that the tariffs against softwood lumber, particularly our very important forestry sector, are unjustified and absolutely unwarranted. We have been working with the Americans to make sure that we are using the dispute settlement mechanism to make sure that there are panels who can actually look into this. We will always stand up for Canadian workers, the Canadian softwood lumber industry, the forestry sector, and I look forward to working with my honourable colleague to keep doing that. Thank you.
Then I have the honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. The time for talk has passed. It will take loans and loan guarantees to cover these illegal duties. The CUSMA litigation process needs a better framework to prevent these dirty, dilatory tricks. We must call for a tax exemption for private forests, which have nothing to do with these allegations by the U.S., and we have to ensure that Washington recognizes that the Quebec forestry regime is compliant with the free trade regulations. We want to collaborate with the government, but it needs to take action. What is it waiting for? The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
I agree with my honourable colleague. Those tariffs are unwarranted, they're unjust. We need to keep standing up for Canadians, forestry workers, and the sector. I appreciate the suggestions coming from my honourable colleague, and I think what you have seen the government do time and time again is work in support of the sector, particularly through our trade commissioners, where we have helped Canadian forestry companies to expand and to diversify. We need to keep doing this, but I welcome the suggestions coming from my honourable colleague and look forward to working with him. Thanks so much.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
This Prime Minister is not worth the cost and the crime. Auto theft is up 300% in Toronto and 100% in Ottawa and Montreal in the last 8 years of his catch and release policies. But his minister says, oh, don't worry. There's already a mandatory jail time provision in 3331A of the Criminal Code. Yes, it's only for 6 months. Today we propose a mandatory 3 years for 3 cars stolen. Will they support this common sense change, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and
thank the Leader opposite for returning to the chamber and returning to this issue. It's an important one, and it's really important to understand the full complexity of the issue. This touches the auto industry, this touches our ports, this touches the criminal code, this touches the CBSA. What I would note for Canadians is that under that party's watch, when that member was actually a cabinet minister, frontier agencies like the CBSA were actually cut. So in terms of providing the resources to keep Canadians safe, it's an interesting record that they've got. I wouldn't be too proud defending it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
His main criticism is that when we were in government, we delivered safe streets at a low cost.
Right.
That's right, we spent less. There was less crime and less costs. That's a good thing. With them, you get more costs and more crime. So why won't they follow our common sense plan to bring down costs and crime by keeping repeat car theft criminals in jail now?
I'm going to just ask for all members, please, to make sure that they listen to the question that's being answered. I know they're experienced members. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we have on display again today is the hypocrisy of the Leader of the Opposition. This week, he pretends to care about auto theft. He's getting comprehensive answers from the Attorney General, Minister of Justice, on what we're doing. He just has empty slogans, and I'll give him some empty slogans. What does this member's campaign manager tell him about food prices? What does she tell him about her lobbying activities with Loblaws? He comes in here shouting slogans like axe the tax. He needs to axe the hacks.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have right here an announcement from the king of lobbying, Hill and Knowlton, which brought on a special national leader of financial communications, who is that member right there. Trying to distract from the fact that crime is raging out of control. Today I announced a common sense plan to end catch and release and house arrest for repeat car theft criminals. Will they adopt this common sense plan to stop the crime?
The Honourable Government House Leader. The Honourable Government House Leader.
It's pretty clear that the Conservatives are off their game today, Mr. Speaker. What has happened here is that their campaign manager, the woman who has contributed, to whom the Leader of the Opposition owes his job, has been exposed as the lead lobbyist for Loblaws, Canada's leading food retailer.
Stephen. Order. Colleagues, it's in everyone's interest that the Speaker be able to hear the questions and the answers which are being put forward in the House. I ask members to please restrain themselves so that I can do so. The Honourable Government House Leader has 13 seconds left on the clock.
The Leader likes to ask specific questions, so I'll ask him. What's been the advice on food prices given by his campaign manager? How much is she getting paid to do that? And what has he promised her? What does he owe this woman for her lobbying for Loblaws?
You're so weak.
The Honourable Member from King's Hands.
Over the weekend, Nova Scotia was hit with some of the worst snowfall amounts in recent memory. In Cape Breton Regional Municipality, over 100 centimeters of snow. the municipality has declared a local state of emergency. There are over 3,000 people without power, Mr. Speaker. There are communities that have been cut off, and there is a concern about people being able to have access to actually leave their homes. Can the Minister for Emergency Preparedness update this House on the work that he is doing alongside provincial, municipal, and members of this House to make sure that people are safe in Cape Breton and indeed all across Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for this question, and in fact, actually thank members of Parliament who kept me updated yesterday on this significant snowfall in Nova Scotia. We received a request for assistance from the Nova Scotian government late last night, something which I approved, and I'm happy to report that search and rescue crews have been working all weekend. Snow clearing heavy equipment from Parks Canada have been made available, as well as transportation support from the Coast Guard, and our humanitarian workforce will provide additional support as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
After 8 years, it's clear that well-connected insiders have never had it as good as they do under this NDP Liberal government. The Arrive Scam Watchdog report found a made-for-insiders process for this $54 million spend, where qualified companies were cut from contracts if they didn't have the right connections and experience. High-priced insiders got paid every time. This wasn't a bug in the system. It was a feature in a process designed to drive up costs and reward insiders. It's clear that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. The only explanation for this insider protection scheme is incompetence or corruption. So which is it?
Which is it? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I have to admit, when I was listening to the member opposite's question about insiders, collusion, corruption, I thought he was talking about their chief advisor, who is also serving as Loblaws lobbyist. And, Mr. Speaker, isn't it interesting how they are blocking legislation to reduce grocery prices? When it comes to our government's record on issues of Arrive Can, Mr. Speaker, all procurement policies must be followed. We have made this very clear. Any reporting of wrongdoing will come with consequences. Can the members opposite say the same for their own House?
The Honourable Member from Fort Saskatchewan, Sherwood Park.
Mr. Speaker, that response had absolutely nothing to do with the question.
That's right.
There is a sham investigation. The government's investigator admitted that he's not independent. His job depends on the government's pleasure. We have with the Arrive scam, when whistleblowers criticize the government, they're suspended without pay. When witnesses defend the government, they're protected. It's a $54 million Arrive sham. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost in spending or in corruption. After 8 years, why is this government continuing to protect their Arrive scam, Arrive sham insider friends?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said in this House time and time again, we expect all contracts to be issued following the rules and procedures set out. Mr. Speaker, CBSA is conducting audits, internal investigations. The police are being called in when necessary. And Mr. Speaker, let me be very, very clear. Any reports of wrongdoing will come with consequences. The Arrive Can app was created at a time to keep Canadians safe, and we expect contracts to be issued following the rules.
The Honourable Member from Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Liberal NDP government wouldn't know accountability if they were hit over the head with it. Today, the Government Operations Committee heard from the Border Services Agency's head of professional integrity. The lesson: this is a kangaroo court for the government to investigate its own department. Min Doan, the chief information officer during Arrive Can, has been accused of deleting key emails. But the investigator reports to the senior officials at the same department that bought Arrive Can. So will this coalition government hold those in charge accountable, or do they plan to hide the dirt like they usually do?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we have said time and time again that we support the work that is being done at committee. The minister has instructed the president of CBSA that, she should be very clear and open with the committee on the work that they are doing. Mr. Speaker, they are providing, there is initial interim reports, there are more investigations happening, and Mr. Speaker, once again, we put in place the Arrive Can app to help Canadians during an extraordinary time, and we expect contracts to be fulfilled following all the rules and procurement practices.
The honourable member from Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this week, every MP in this House will have a chance to vote in solidarity with Ukraine by voting in favour of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. It's important to remember that the Ukrainian people are not just fighting for their own security, they're also fighting for our security, and we need to be fighting for them. Our government has been unequivocal in our support for Ukraine, but under this leader, Conservatives have abandoned for Ukraine. They voted against Operation Unifier, against military aid, and they've used their climate change denialism as an excuse to vote against this free trade agreement. Could the Minister of International Trade clarify the environmental provisions in this agreement and explain why it is so important that everyone vote in solidarity with Ukraine?
The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
I want to thank the member for Etobicoke Centre for his strong advocacy for his constituents and for Ukrainian Canadians. For months, this Conservative leader claimed that the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement would impose a price on pollution on Ukraine. Last week in this House, the member for Sarnia-Lambton confirmed that, in fact, Ukraine has had a price on pollution since 2011. I would say and ask the Conservatives, join everyone in this House, vote in support Ukraine, vote for the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. President Zelensky wants it. Canadians want it. Conservatives should support Ukraine.
Good. The honourable member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, we've learned that the Conservative housing strategy is to browbeat so-called municipal gatekeepers and to force density near transit hubs. Now, neither of these things are relevant for rural Canada. In fact, in Northwest BC, we don't have transit hubs. We barely have public transit. People deserve affordable housing, but what mayors in my region tell me is that they can't build it without infrastructure, and here's where the Liberals come in. Why are communities having to wait so long to hear back about vital infrastructure grants?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Member talks about affordable housing. 500 applications are across the country and 30 deals completed thus far. That will continue, Mr. Speaker. And what do we see as a result of that? Adding to supply, which of course underpins the housing crisis in front of us. The housing crisis is ultimately a crisis in supply, and that's why we're working with municipalities, in particular mayors, which the Leader of the Opposition continues to denigrate, so that zoning changes can take place in return for federal dollars. That does happen, and more building happens. Duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, mid-rise apartments, all of that is a part of that, Mr. Speaker. I'll deal with the member after question period if he wishes to take up the concern.
The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all remember 2015 will be the last election under first past the post. Now, without access to a time machine, it's simply not possible anymore to keep that promise, but this House has an opportunity to reach out to disillusioned and frustrated Canadians who so desperately want fair voting. We have a chance to pass Motion 86 on Wednesday. Will the Prime Minister support this motion that allows a citizens' jury, our fellow citizens, to help him find the consensus he so desperately wants?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to Canadians' right to vote, this is a trusted system that Canadians, there must be consensus on. So, Mr. Speaker, while we are working with Canadians on how to ensure that every Canadian has more opportunities to be able to access their right to vote, I know PROC Committee is working hard on recommendations as well if the Conservatives will ever end their filibuster and get down to the real work of this Parliament to ensure that our democratic institutions are strong and accessibility to vote is also strong.
And so brings the end to question period. Comme il est 15 heures.
It being 3:13 p.m., the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Mr. Poilievre relating to the business of supply. Call in the members.
La question est la suivante.
The question is as follows. Mr. Poliev, seconded by Mr. Duncan, Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry, moved that given that the carbon tax has proven to be a tax plan, not an environmental plan, the House call on the Liberal government to cancel the April 1st, 2024 carbon tax increase.
La période de 10 minutes pour les députés votant.
The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started, and the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person.
Tous ceux qui appuient la
All those